What's up, guys? Welcome back to RC Overload Tuesdays. I know, finally we're bringing it back. I had to take a little bit of a break to kind of play catch up on some videos, plus I had some other things going on. So I did take a break for about a month or so. Yeah. But anyways, we are back and we are answering your questions that you guys ask us. I am going back today, pretty far back to kind of play a little catch up with some questions that I've had a couple weeks ago anyways. But for those of you guys that don't know what RC Overload Tuesdays are, they're basically where you guys ask me questions about the RC hobby, about me, my trucks, YouTube, filmmaking, and stuff like that, and I answer them as best I can here on the show for you guys. Usually we answer somewhere between 3 to 5 questions, sometimes a little bit more, depending on how in-depth I go with answering the questions. Yeah, so I kind of pick them at random a little bit. So, as I always say in all of my RC Overload Tuesdays, put your questions down in the comment box below, and I kind of pick them at random for the most part, and see if it comes up on the next Tuesday's episode. So, without further ado, let's get into today's first question. Is the Rubicon body held up with magnets? How's that hold up? Yes, the SCX10, my original SCX10, I did manage to get it set up with using some basic magnets. I can't remember where I got them from or what brand it is. They're the Eurodinium magnets or whatever they are. But I did do magnets, and basically what I did is on the posts themselves, where you have the little bump where typically the clip will go into to hold the body down, I grinded that right off to make it a nice smooth flat surface. And then I used some super glue and glued it right onto the post itself. I just lined it in the same spots right up on the body, and then glued some right onto the body as well. And honestly, it's probably one of the best setups I've actually ever done. When I was first doing it, I wasn't so sure if it was actually going to work or not, but they are really strong magnets, and they hold up very well. Even during a crash. The heck was that noise? Anyway, sorry about that. Like I mentioned, even during a crash, the body really didn't fall off much. If it did, it just, it moved a little bit, and I was just able to pop the body right back on. As far as crawling and stuff, there's no issues with it whatsoever with it. It doesn't come loose or anything like that. Like I said, it's actually worked a lot better than I thought it would. So it's something I'm going to try to explore a little more of here in the future. Maybe make a video for you guys on how I did that. But I'm kind of still testing it out a little bit. But like I said, it does actually work pretty well. The magnet size themselves were just a little bit smaller than the posts that were originally there. So, we'll see. Next question. Was wondering what you recommend for a 12-pound Yeti X for front shocks. Using Pro Specs with orange GPM springs barely keep front end up. Thanks. With my Yeti, I also ran into a similar issue. I don't actually have my second Yeti that had the Yeti X setup in it. I actually gave that to my buddy Brett. I don't know what he's doing with that nowadays. But anyways, I have a similar setup on my stock Yeti, which does still have the Carter Fab machine plate underneath, so it does have all that extra weight. It's got a ton of aluminum and stuff like that in it. So I do know what you're talking about. The front ends of the Yetis themselves are generally just heavy versus the back. What I've figured out is, because I was using the Pro Spec shocks with purple springs, is I actually switched everything over to the Power Stroke shocks and started experimenting a little bit with their spring rates. Now, I do forget, I have it right here, let me go take a look. Okay, the springs that I'm using with those Power Stroke shocks are the Proline springs, and what I'm using is the green rate small black ones on top, and I'm using the yellow ones on the bottom right now. It does seem to work pretty well for me, but I would actually recommend, where yours is 12 pounds, I don't think mine is that much, to experiment a little bit with the spring rates. But that's the setup I'm using right now, is the green springs and the yellow springs with it. And so far it seems great. I haven't really gotten a lot of testing out with it, but it's still soft, but yet it also holds up the Yeti's weight when it's just driving. So that works for me. Try something like that. Hey, can I ask, how would you go about sorting out the play in the wheels? No, you can't. I'm not answering that. I have an amp MT, but I found that all four wheels have a fair bit of play in them. I don't know how to go about sorting them out. Typically in most RCs, you're going to find that the wheels in general are going to have a little bit of play. Now, depending on what you're talking about for play, you could have steering play, and then you could also have just general play in the wheels themselves. If it's just general play in the wheels themselves, there's a few things that I've done to kind of help improve all of that. Usually the first thing I do when I get, especially with ECX, that, you know, it's a cheaper quality, doesn't have some of the better components in them. But one thing I found out is if you put in a better set of bearings into the hubs, there tends to be a lot less play in the wheels. There's also another trick that you can do that's been out for a while, is sometimes you'll find when you take the wheels off, right behind the drive pin itself before the bearing, there's sometimes a little spacer or a washer that sits back there. I've tried this and it does work. If you get a little bit thicker of a spacer or washer, or put in an extra one to kind of make up that little bit of play, that sometimes work. But you don't want it, you know, tight in there, because you're going to create friction and start burning out parts basically and breaking bearings and everything. So by adding just a little bit more of a spacer or washer sometimes helps take up that excess space. Upgrading the hubs to like something with aluminum or even RPM parts, that's a huge increase. You know, try those couple of things. Put the spacer in the bearings, upgrading the hubs and stuff like that. If it's steering play, basically you're just going to end up replacing your entire steering setup. You know, metal steering links in it, upgraded steering rack basically, and then just one of the best ways to do it is start taking some parts off and seeing what still has play, and that kind of gives you an idea as far as where to start looking to improving the play in the suspension or the wheels. Did you a simulator to learn how to fly? Yes, I have used a simulator a bunch of times to learn how to fly. However, I do not rely on a simulator to teach me how to fly 100%. I have mixed feelings when it comes to simulators. I think simulators are great when you're first starting out to learn the controls and to understand how the airplane or helicopter or drone is going to react to the controls, what direction it works, what, you know, how to compensate for certain things, versus taking one out for the first time and then end up crashing it and then you're out of it thing. You know, you can just keep crashing this and kind of learn from there. But when you start getting better with it and you're not really crashing on the simulator that much, that's when you kind of need to stop. That's where you need to stop. And the reason why I say that is because the simulator can only be so good. One of the biggest things I found is, even though that some simulators, they replicate great wind and weather conditions, it's still not 100%. Where I live here on Cape Cod, we usually average about 5 to 15 mile an hour winds almost every single day. Almost. I mean, actually today it's raining like crazy as usual, but there's no wind. Go figure. But I've learned that with the simulators that I've used, and I mostly trained on the Phoenix simulator, that the wind on there just doesn't replicate what I would experience in the real world. So it's hard to learn how to fly a plane in wind on a simulator when in the real world it's totally different. I could be out in an open field below tree level, a little bit of breeze, I can combat it a little bit, and then I start going up just a little bit, and all of a sudden the wind completely changes direction. I got wind blowing this way, I got downdrafts coming, and my plane will honestly go all over the place. I actually, my apprentice that I got sitting right here, some of you guys saw in the other video, I took that out actually last night to play around a little bit. It was a decent afternoon, there was really not that much wind, maybe 5 miles an hour. And I put it into intermediate mode, and I was struggling with that plane because it is so light. There was a lot of, you know, above the tree level, there was a lot of crosswinds going in both directions. You got the downdrafts that were happening as well. And so the plane literally was just all over the place. I'd have it banked, and all of a sudden it would just take a sharp turn. I never would experience that on simulators. It wouldn't just randomly kick in or something like that when I was on the simulator versus actually flying. So it does make it a little more difficult, and that's when you're going to need to go from being on a simulator to just getting out there and flying. I have learned more about how to fly my planes and helicopters and stuff just by doing it. But I do still think the simulator is great for when you first get an aircraft or helicopter, just to understand how it flies, how it works, and what the controls kind of do on it. But don't expect to train 100% on a simulator thinking that you're going to be a professional. I can do 3D maneuvers all day long with my helicopters on the simulator. I take it out into the real world, I'm not ready to try that yet because it acts totally different out in the real world. But I kind of have an idea of what I need to do when it comes time for me to do it. So, hopefully that helps you. Last question. What's the best kind of fuel, nitro percentage, and or best way to tune, rich or lean, for running a nitro in warm weather, 90 degrees Fahrenheit? Because I run my nitro rustler on 30% and it seems to always be overheating and shutting off by itself. I usually try to run the engine a bit rich. This is a little complicated. You know, it also, the biggest thing too is it depends on where you live. And I've mentioned this before in other videos, and I am planning on making a video about tuning to give you a better understanding of all this. But to kind of go into this quickly here, what I usually run all my nitro trucks where I live, and I'm on sea level, okay? No matter what the temperature is, I always run my trucks on 20% nitro, and it's just it's a nice comfortable spot. So you got a good amount of power, good amount of lubrication. It's not too much power, it's not too much lubrication, you know, for the 10, 30, 20% type of deal. So I just stick with 20%, nice comfortable medium area. I usually run my trucks a little bit more on the rich side to give the engine a little bit extra protection out of the oil in the fuel. I try not to run it lean. If I was going to run it a little more lean, I'd be running races, and then I'd be okay with my motors blowing occasionally or having to replace them more often. But as just being a general bashing guy, just takes it out, hits jumps, does donuts and dirt and stuff, I like to run mine a little more on the rich side. Where you mentioned that you keep burning out the motor, it just keeps stopping, it sounds to me like it's definitely running hot. So maybe you aren't running it as rich as you think you are. Maybe you could be. But that could also be you're fouling up the plug from running 30% and the tune's just off a little bit. So my best recommendation would be, if you want to run 30%, reset your needles back down to factory specs. Run the car around. See what it's starting to do. If it's bogging, try to lean it a little bit. If it's cutting out at top speed, try to richen it a little bit. And play around. That's one thing with nitros. They are very finicky. Another issue you could also be running into is depending on how old the motor is. If the motor is really old, you could be running into compression issues. So as it warms up, the sleeve is expanding and you're losing the compression between the piston and the sleeve there, not allowing you to get the power you want. And all of a sudden, because of that expansion and the temperature is increased in it, your tune is now off on the truck, which ultimately you need a new piston and sleeve to recorrect that and then re-brake in the motor and so forth. But again, eventually I'm going to go in more in depth with it. I kind of need to do a little refresher myself with my Revo that I got back here, and again, we're just waiting on nice weather to get out and break that in so I can get re-familiar with everything. You know, my recommendation is just bring it back down to factory specs. Anytime there's a question on tune, bring it back down to factory specs and start from there. But like I said, I'll go more in depth when it comes time to that. I'll show you guys examples of things you might run into and how to deal with them and stuff like that. We'll make it easy, we'll make it fun, because I think Nitro really should make a comeback, and I think a lot of you guys would actually enjoy running Nitros. I really do. They're not as bad as people think. It's just when you run into problems, there's a lot of frustration because nobody really seems to understand how to fix those or what could be wrong with them. Believe me, I've run into 1,000,001 problems. I have an idea of what needs to get fixed. So again, we'll make a video on that. Alright, so hopefully I answered your questions, you guys, a little bit in depth. Trying to get back into the routine of doing things again. Going back into the old memory here. But thank you guys for watching today's episode. Like I mentioned in the beginning, if you have any questions about anything, again, YouTube, me, my RC collection, RCs in general, comparisons, or anything like that, feel free to drop me a comment below in the comment section. Make sure you subscribed and be on the lookout for next week's Tuesday's episode. I'm off to go edit this video, post it for you guys, and I got a lot more work to do. A lot more videos. A lot more fun. Alright, see you guys later. Woo!